Hello, my name is Kevin Short. I'm currently writing my dissertation in philosophy of religion for Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and I'm hearing still a lot of grief from Harris voters, and they are taking some very massive swings, not at Trump, but at his base. Now, the Republicans should probably be very happy about that. I think one of the things that really hurt Hillary Clinton in 2016 and really hurt Kamala Harris in 2024 is that Hillary referred to grassroots conservatives as a basket of deplorables, and Biden called them garbage. And I know Biden has given an alternate explanation. I don't really believe him. So there's a sense in which I could say, well, this is great because, this will guarantee further Republican victories. But I think it's bad for the country. So let me give you an alternate answer as to why people voted for Trump other than misogyny. Number one, as I noted, I am not a Trump fan. I don't think he's the best president we've ever had. I frankly prefer a Republican like Ronald Reagan. There are a number of reasons for this. Trump does represent a shift in the party that I'm not fond of, but hey, that's the way things are. Trump is more of a blue dog Democrat, which shows something of the shift that has happened in the political sphere within my lifetime as a Gen Xer. Now, even though I didn't like Trump, I still voted for him. We had three choices. We could vote for Trump, we could vote for Harris, or we could abstain, which would include voting for third party. And I seriously considered abstaining. But I ended up voting for Trump because I was very nervous that Harris would undermine our democratic principles. Now, without trying to argue why my case is correct, I want you to instead evaluate it from the standpoint of, is this or is this not a reasonable reason to vote for Trump? And I think it is. First, there is what we would call the insurrectionist approach that the Democratic Party has taken. And this seems to play into a bit of conspiracy theories that are going on about that are called blue anons by some. And I think that's a fair characterization because it is very much like QAnon. But, this argument that the riot on January 6th was an insurrection, I think has some problems. First of all, where were the AR-15s? Why does it not show any degree of careful planning? If this is an insurrection, why are so many people, why are there videos that were of people wandering the halls, etc.? But there were other problems besides those that have been noted elsewhere in the way that the January 6th riot has been portrayed, including by the House committee that looked into it. These included not turning over exculpatory evidence, the fact that the House committee did not take the proper steps of having an attorney to represent the other side of the discussion. The Supreme Court has come out and said that there were some problems with the way these things were charged because there's, kind of a tendency here for avant-garde treatment of certain points. But when it comes to Trump, there was this effort that was made to remove him from the ballot as an insurrectionist. Now, here's the problem. He's not been convicted of insurrection. And as I understand it, most of the case law does seem to indicate that that is a requirement to remove somebody from the ballot. But not only is he not convicted to the point, he's not even been charged with it. Why? Probably because the prosecutor, who seems extremely aggressive, knows he can't make the case. And I think this is a problem. Even if the case law isn't on Trump's side, what it shows is an abuse of power, because if he's not been convicted, he's been denied his due process rights. And that's the kind of thing someone sees in a fascist dictatorship. Second, besides the January 6th issue, there are all of these other lawsuits. Now, I do think the Mar-a-Lago suit has a lot of merit, although I also think there is a problem for a prosecutor not, for the U.S. attorney not going in front of the Senate and getting confirmed. It's a bit of a problem if, we have a way of skirting around if the president or the AG has the ability to skirt around the requirement for Senate confirmation for somebody to have prosecutorial powers. But that said, many of the other cases, they seem very rickety. And in one case, there's clearly evidence that the judge should have recused himself. And in the other case, his real estate case, the fine that was given is really a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which prevents unreasonable fines. Now, why do I think the fine is unreasonable? Because he's been fined more than some of the biggest financial frauds in U.S. history. That, again, I think points to the fact that, and there's other cases of this that go back about 2 decades, of the Democratic Party using prosecutorial power to go after political adversaries. That, again, is a problem of fascism. Now, let's get to a third point. During the 2020 election, there was a whole controversy over Hunter Biden's laptop. And it eventually came out that the government appears, according to Meta, and according to some other documents and some other research, that seems to indicate that the government put pressure on social media outlets to close down the story. And it's very troubling when any government body wants to interfere in an election that way. This, again, is a symptom of fascism. And if you look not only at what a lot of Democratic operatives have said, but you also look at some of the response, you have people saying, hey, we need to deal with misinformation. Now, based on the Hunter laptop story, you have to start asking, how do we know which side is involved in misinformation? But what these amount to is opposition to freedom of speech and opposition to the freedom of the press. This, again, fits the definition of fascism. So when people are saying that Trump is a fascist, there's a lot of senses in which I think many on the left, and it seems to include Harris to a certain degree, are using anti-fascism as an argument to install fascism. And I consider that dangerous. Now, let's look for a moment at what most people consider a reasonable definition of fascism. The idea is that it is a left-wing government, or a right-wing government, that has strong centralized authority over everything in the country, and that goes after its political adversaries using government power. There are some problems with this, because other than the right wing, this also fits communism, and Jordan Peterson and a number of others have noted that there's not a lot of difference between the swastika and the hammer and sickle. Certainly, communism is one of the ideologies that has committed heinous crimes, and it has been basically a death cult. But that said, let's look at these 3 components. Number 1, right wing. Well, the problem with that, and I dislike the political spectrum. I'd much rather look at somebody's political and ethical views and ask, are they utilitarians? Are they Kantians? Are they, Christians holding to divine command theory? Are they virtue theorists? That's really the way I like to look at these things, because the spectrum, I think, doesn't always account for foundational issues. However, even if one does accept the idea of a political spectrum, right wing is not always a great descriptor. For example, F.A. Hayek, in his book, The Road to Serfdom, chided American conservatives for calling themselves conservatives rather than classical liberals. Because, in fact, an American conservative is a classic liberal in Europe at that point in time. If you look at the actual fascist government and the Nazi government, they share far more in common with 19-teens, 1920s, 1930s progressivism more than they do any type of conservatism at that point in time. Interestingly enough, at that time, scientific racism was primarily a progressive movement and was not considered conservative. That really doesn't change until the 60s, by the way. Really, the left was the major opposition to ending racism until that point in time, when the left rather repudiated Roosevelt and other types of policies. But that's a subject for another day. Other than to note the Dixiecrats were, for the most part, Rooseveltians. But anyway, right wing, I'm not sure how that applies because I don't know what they mean by right. Centralized authority, well, that wasn't what we had under Trump. That, in fact, is far more of what we've seen with the Harris and Biden administration than with Trump's. Trump's administration was a bit poorly functioning, which is not generally what we think of with fascism, right? The big comment with the fascists was that at least the trains ran on time. And that really wasn't true under Trump's administration as much. And then we have the final issue, and it's the case I've already made. It was the Democrats that have really gone after their political opponents in a way that Trump didn't when he was in office. Now, there were a lot of discussions in 2016 about locking up Hillary. And there are issues there. There certainly was, in the previous administration, a tendency to treat Republicans and Democrats in legal trouble in very different ways if they were, high-powered Democrats. But Trump didn't actually do it. There's talk about putting people into concentration camps. The only Americans I've heard discussing anything like that were people associated with Bernie Sanders, who were talking about putting Trump voters in gulags. Some people wanted to say, and you see some pundits saying, well, economic issues were on the ballot and that was a Trump support issue, and democracy was on the ballot and that was a reason to support Harris. I'm giving you a reason to say that if democracy is on the ballot, it's not necessarily a strong case for Harris. Now, you may disagree with me. That's fine. But my point, again, wasn't to try and convince you necessarily that my case is correct. I'd rather you research it and think it through for yourself. That's the philosopher in me. But I just want to note why this idea that people voted against Harris because of misogyny, and quite frankly, we're seeing some very, very racist statements being made about Latino men, and in some cases about black men. This is why misogyny is not a good explanation. Thank you. Again, my name is Kevin Short. I'm a Christian philosopher of religion, and I hope you'll take this into consideration and maybe exercise a little more charity towards those you disagree with.